This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Hello, world, and welcome to a Geek Leader podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda. Today's sponsor is A2 Hosting. I've been using A2 Hosting solid state hosting solutions for our website at geekleader.com for many years now, and absolutely love their support, their service, and all the features that you get. You get access to cPanel. You get all of the things that you can imagine for a great WordPress experience, including their A2 optimized WordPress, which does extra security checks, extra lockdown. You can lock down your editor file so you can't edit anything inside there. You get alerts whenever there are file changes that are done. You can also do automatic updates, backups, and more with A2 Hosting. So highly recommend it. Go to geekleader.com/A2 to get more information and to sign up for their solid state turbocharged speed hosting today. Again, that's at geekleader.com/A2. All right, Geek Leaders. Today on the show, I'm honored to have the founder and CEO of Meltano, Douwe Maan, and he is coming to us from Mexico City, which is pretty awesome. I love the international flavor. He was born and raised in the Netherlands, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, a little bit, and was one of the first 10 employees at GitLab, which I'm sure a lot of our listeners have used GitLab in the past. And I think just recently they went public not too long ago, which is kind of an interesting story. But with all that being said, Douwe, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, John. I'm excited to be here.
If you don't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about how you got to where you are in your career, how you and why you founded our Meltano. Like where did that come from, and kind of what led you down that path to get to that point?
Yeah, good question. I mean, ending up at Meltano definitely has to take us through GitLab. But then if we just go all the way back, I found out pretty quickly that computers were more than just, a box for doing email and Word. My father always had like Linux around the house. I grew up kind of thinking of computers as malleable and really a creative outlet. So at 9 years old, I started programming and I found out throughout my sort of time in primary school even that there were people on the internet willing to pay even an 11-year-old kid like $5 an hour to write some code for them. So all the way through high school, I sort of did that, and I learned how to deal with customers, clients, deadlines, all of that stuff. So from a pretty early age, I was combining the satisfying my own intellectual curiosity and writing code and solving problems that way with the there's other people with problems and they will actually pay you if you help them solve theirs, kind of entrepreneurial side of things. So through high school, I did a lot of that PHP web development on a freelance basis for the most part. And then I taught myself how to learn iOS and Mac development. Well, I taught myself how to do it, not to learn it, but I guess it's the same thing. And I ended up making some iPhone apps, and I ended up working for a little studio in the Netherlands that made iPhone and Mac apps for various productivity use cases. And for a few years I was doing that, and then I realized with my co-founders that it was actually quite hard to build, make money on the App Store at the time. You kind of have this initial hype when you launch your app, and maybe you get featured on the App Store, and then afterwards it just really kind of dies down, and you got to really fight to get people to pay the $1 to $3, whatever the amount was, to buy your app. So at that point, we decided to sort of start doing something different. Me, at the time, my boss, and another new business partners of his, and we ended up building a platform for bed and breakfast owners to manage all of their online presence and communication. So it had functionality for managing your website and your guest communications and your reservation calendar for all of those bed and breakfasts that weren't just throwing up a room on Airbnb, but that really cared about their house style and their brand. And they've been doing this for decades, and very much that mom and pop, you're actually at someone's home almost kind of experience. And they needed a better tooling for managing their online stuff. So through that, I ended up at being at a conference at some point in Athens in Greece, where I ended up running into some other Dutch people. Myself being from the Netherlands, it's always nice when you run across people from your country and you just get to chat in your own language for a bit. And it turned out that one of the people I met, his parents actually owned a bed and breakfast, and he started using my product. And then in conversation, it turned out that his company was actually building GitLab, which at the time was not more than just an open source GitHub clone. And we kept running into each each other at different conferences, and eventually he asked me if I wanted to join GitLab just when it was going to go into the Y Combinator Accelerator program in San Francisco. I was still in college at the time. I had been enjoying that startup that we had been building, but we also realized that the sort of risk appetite between me and my co-founders was so different that we decided that it wasn't really going to work trying to do the whole raising money thing and making this a rocket ship. So I reached out to Sid, again, the founder of GitLab, and said like, hey, I changed my mind. Let's see if we can make this work. And I ended up joining GitLab originally as I think employee number 10 and probably engineer number 4 or so. And really quickly, I sort of became the primary code reviewer for that entire team. So now we can take it back a little bit to engineering leadership. I turned out to just be really good at code review. That's pretty much how I had taught myself to code, just reading tons and tons of code in open source projects. And it gave me just a really keen eye for both critically looking at my own code, which allowed me to produce really high quality code even by myself as sort of a sole engineer. And then when I came into a team, it turned out that it was just a really great collaborative effort for me to, go through the code, give all my feedback, and then we'd have a back and forth. And I and the other person would always come out having learned more about how we saw things. And it allowed us both to just build a really complete sort of understanding of the code and how all these different moving parts fit together to come together and form the bigger product. So doing that for a little while, it turned out that we needed more engineers, and I was sort of tapped to also become hiring manager and then the first engineering manager at GitLab. So a year into it, when I was still at college, finishing my computer science bachelor's degree, working part-time, I ended up leading a team of 14 engineers at GitLab. I'd never had a manager myself. I'd never even been through a proper hiring process myself because I had sort of, met Sid and gotten into the company that way. But I had to learn really quickly how to do hiring and how to do, of course, interviewing and everything that comes with managing a team like that. One massive advantage being GitLab, being an open source product for developers, is that we had a massive community of really motivated people who, just through contributing to the project, were essentially proving that they would also make great full-time employees. So my initial experiences as a hiring manager were definitely easier than most because we didn't have to do much outbound sourcing or even really complicated technical tests, because for the most part, these were people we were already working with in the open source community. And we ended up just, basically hiring them once they'd proven that they had the async communication skills and everything that were so important at GitLab, considering that it was an all remote company. So after a few years of managing various backend engineering teams at GitLab, I realized that with GitLab having grown from like 10 people to 1,400, I was really sort of craving those early startup days, smaller team. You can really see the immediate impact of your work, in your community and with your users. And instead of leaving GitLab for something new, there was this opportunity to join an internal project at GitLab called Meltano, where they were essentially trying to bring some of these software development best practices to data teams and how data teams collaborate to help their organizations deliver insights and just be more effective at whatever goal they've set for themselves. So I joined that team as engineering lead, and then 6 months later, because after about 2 years of that project having been around GitLab, the numbers, the metrics, the growth weren't quite there to justify continued 6 people full-time headcount on the project. And the decision was made to reduce that headcount down to 1, thereby leaving me by myself on the project basically for all of 2020 to see if I could turn it around. That ended up working out quite well. So by the end of 2020, early 2021, I had originally sort of pivoted a little bit, changed the positioning, and found a way to really resonate with this community we had attracted and have it start growing. And then early 2021, we started looking into ways to really spread our wings and spin out of GitLab as an independent startup and raise some external funding, which we ended up doing. So we raised a seed round from GV, formerly known as Google Ventures, in early 2021. And then now, a year later, that's meant that the team has grown to 16 people. I'm CEO now, no longer general manager like I was for that year at GitLab, and no longer engineering lead like I was for that. And we just raised another round, and we just launched our 2.0. And now we are really kind of pulling off what Meltano had originally been sort of founded to do inside GitLab, which is to bring these software development best practices to data teams and how they build their data platform. And I'd love to talk more about that later, but that's a quick not so quick, but it's a pretty detailed run through, starting to program at 9 years old, and now 19 years later, startup CEO, living in Mexico City. But as it happens, I'm in San Francisco this week because we have a lot of connections and investors here that it's good to get some FaceTime with.
Awesome. And I'm gonna go way back in your story because you talked about iPhone apps, and I taught myself also iOS back in 2010. Actually, is when I released my first app to the App Store. Just learning how to do that stuff on my own. And you mentioned that you were able to look at your own code and kind of review that yourself, and that's always been like a super hard thing for me to do. I can't review my own code. I don't know why. It's so difficult. To find that. It's like reading your own emails. I can't do it. I don't know why. I struggle with that.
So I have that with podcast episodes. I don't know if I'll listen to this recording because it's just too difficult for me to. But yeah, with the code. So well, I mean, in the 2010 days of iOS development, which is just about when I joined too, it was like Objective-C, this arcane language with square brackets everywhere. But yeah, for me, I would never be able to read my code or review it immediately after having written it. But just like the next day in the morning, opening up that pull request and going through it line by line and just seeing it in retrospect, that was still the best way to accomplish whatever goal the code was meant to do. Came pretty easy to me, although the difficulty was sometimes just finding out how much more time refactoring and rewriting is this worth, and when are you hitting that point of like diminishing return, you should probably just move on to the next feature. But the nice thing was that now, of course, like in startup world, and you sort of feel the pressure to make the most of your time, and you should be working on the next feature without sort of overthinking the thing you were just working on before. Back then, I mean, I was just a 16-year-old after school at home. I could spend days and days rewriting the same 5 features to really get them to a place where I felt, it was code that I would be happy with even 6 months later. And it's sort of nice in that vacuum to get to just hone that skill without constantly having to kind of balance it against the ROI of yet another hour on this part of the code base.
Yeah, I know, like the transition period of like when you mentioned you have to wait a day, I guess I could go back a couple of days later when I kind of forgotten what I wrote and then maybe look at it. But it seems like every time I look at it, I either get frustrated with myself and I don't like doing it. It's like listening to your own podcast, right? You hear all the ums and ahs and all the terrible things that you do that are just bad habits. And you look at your code, you see the bad habits that you did because you were lazy at the time and just don't want to do it. It's just too frustrating for me. So
yeah, but with a podcast recording, you cannot go back and fix it, at least not really. But with code, you can, and that is a very valuable skill. So as a tech leader, at least if you're not just purely on the engineering management side, but you also want to be that that resource that they that thinks with these engineers through all of the architectural implications and whatever else. It's really good to be able to go back and also look at the code you wrote and suss out those little issues.
So let me ask you this: now that you're CEO, you founded a company, you've built the team, or you're in the process of even building the team even bigger now. Do you ever go back and look at the code, or is that you kind of sunsetted that?
Yeah, I had to remove myself from the critical path, which is I was also so used to that for a long time, because even at GitLab, when it started out, I was like engineering lead, and it was very much sort of a 50% people and tech role. So I was still doing a ton of code review. But over time, of course, also as in GitLab, as in any growing organization, the roles specialize and narrow. I got clear messaging, or like it became clear that my own managers, my director or whatever, wanted me to start doing less code review, and more just all in on the engineering management and the people management and the hiring. So there were already a few years there in GitLab where I really wasn't writing much code at all. And then it was partially that led me to this Meltano project, where it would be more of one of those 50-50 engineering lead roles with still code review going on, and maybe the occasional small bug fix or feature that fell on my plate. So I did that then for 6 months, and then for a year I was doing all of Meltano. I was coding pretty much every day again, although I did have to sort of switch from the programmer hat to the product manager hat, and then like I would go on podcasts and be like marketer hat, and I would constantly be changing who I was. I would do support in Slack all day. But then now, for the last year that we've actually had a big team with dedicated engineers, I've been touching the code very little. But then last week when we launched 2.0, we realized that we had been a little bit optimistic on some of the sort of features that we had planned to get in on time, and I actually had to step in for a few days and push some stuff over the finish line and do some code review and write some bug fixes, and that was really fun. But I also just know that that's no longer the best use that I can use my time, unfortunately, and I have to look more for those kind of opportunities outside of work. But it's kind of bittersweet, right? Because you fall in love with programming and problem solving and sort of code as a way to do it. And then if you decide to sort of take this path of like, wow, I'm pretty good at this, I could also help a team become better at this, you kind of step away from the thing that maybe made you fall in love with it originally. And I definitely understand engineers who maybe give the management thing a try for a year and then decide like, nah, I just much prefer being writing code all day. That's not what ended up happening for me, but I totally understand.
Yeah, and there's some things that I do to kind of keep that, I guess, to scratch that itch of coding, and so one thing is I teach part-time. So I teach one class,
Cool.
one computer science classes, semester at the local college. And that's what, like, gives me that little bit of feel of learning what's new, staying on top of it, and I can bring that to my team too, which is also helpful. And then one thing I started probably 5 or 6 years ago, I started something called Fun Day Fridays. So on Fridays, I try not to schedule any meetings and I'm going to write code. I'm going to do something that's not a critical path, not even a project that we're really working on. It may be some internal like workflow that I want to optimize, or automate a piece of it or something like that. So I'll get in and just tinker, on Fridays. And that's my Fun Day Friday. And then again, I still occasionally build a mobile app here and there just for fun, usually like a game my kid likes or is interested in, So, but yeah, that's cool.
That's cool. I mean, so the Fun Day thing, like, yeah, we have like a hack day. I think it's once every month, 2 months or so, where also on a Friday we just tell the whole team like, yeah, just work on whatever. And the cool thing is that it's sort of similar, of course, to like the Google 30% thing, although 30% or whatever the percentage was is a lot of time. 20% maybe it was 1 day a week. But in our case, still like cool stuff comes out of that, little POCs. And then sometimes, the actually finishing those up does become prioritized on the regular product roadmap, or if the community has like a good response, we prioritize it this way. So this week on Friday, since last week was the 2.0 launch, and we had like a lot of work and a couple of like later nights building up to that, this week is going to be a little chiller for the team, including Friday being one of those hack days. So I'm excited myself to actually get my hands dirty again. But yeah, building games for your kid is nice. I mean, it sounds like I don't have children yet, but that's something I would love to do at some point, because it really is like those early days when you just work on whatever problem you think you're facing yourself right now. You want to scratch that itch. Like one of the examples I use to explain sometimes to people how powerful it is to be able to program as a kid is that I used to listen to the radio a lot. And of course, back then it wasn't just like an old school FM radio. There were already like streams online, but I would also really like having the lyrics always visible, because for me, when I hear a song, I cannot not listen to the lyrics. And I would also want to understand, like, okay, what is it telling? What's the story that's going on? So as a programmer, I made the connection that, since all of that radio stream was just, of course, like bits coming down the wire, and I knew that radios, but also, I mean, like physical FM radios, but also sort of those digital ones in cars sometimes have this little window that shows the current playing artist or whatever. So I was like, okay, there must be somewhere embedded in this audio stream some metadata, little blocks, sections, whatever. So I ended up writing a script that would just bit by bit basically listen to that whole stream, identify those little components where it just was sharing the title of the artist and the song, and then I would take that information and then build a separate script that would basically just do a Google search for that like artist title followed by the word lyrics, parse the top 4 results or whatever, see if they were websites that I had like hard coded with some of these popular lyric websites, go in there, scrape from like the main body text content field, the text, and then I would have this always on like a second monitor, where when I was listening to the radio, I would always have the lyrics of the currently playing song just showing there. And now, of course, with Spotify and whatever, this, the app does this for you. But that was one of those small things where when I was 16 and I was listening to the radio, being able to see the computer as sort of this endless world of possibilities where, connecting stuff and making it do something useful for you is just so motivating and empowering to that was so much fun. I would love to kind of build little apps to make stuff easier for myself around the house again, or for your kid in your situation.
Yeah, it's really fun to do things like that, and it's also cool when you can tell your kid, yeah, I built that. Yeah, that's my app. Go put my
Totally.
name in. Go to the app store, and type in my name. You'll see. Put in your last name. You'll see our stuff. That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
So, tell me about like this transition. When what did it feel like for you whenever GitLab was saying like, look, we have to cut some staff, we have to reduce, and see if you can do this. Like, what was that pressure like on you, and how were you able to to kind of fight through that as a leader and then turn this whole thing around? Because that was kind of like a big deal. It's a big turning point in Meltano's like history, and I think that's pretty awesome that you were able to do that.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, Meltano had been, around since 2018, and it was it's basically started inside GitLab with the idea of the GitLab data team was kind of looking around at the kind of tools available to them, and they found that a lot of these software development best practices that inside GitLab, of course, were every single day we were building a platform for programmers to collaborate more effectively, or software development teams to do so. And we saw the value of things like version control and code review and CI/CD, automated testing, isolated environments. And the data team had been more exposed to this kind of stuff than most data teams by being just surrounded by these types of software developers all day. And they wanted some of the same stuff. They realized, wow, we could also be more effective at our jobs and have higher confidence in whatever we build if we actually have some of those software development or DevOps best practices applied. So in 2018, this idea came up in GitLab, and then for a while there, some people inside GitLab were just working on this full time, and then I joined. But from day one, they thought, okay, we're going to build this end-to-end platform that just does everything from pulling the data out of various systems all the way to allowing you to build a pretty dashboard that shows, whatever results for the query you've written. And over that year and a half or so before I joined the team, it was also becoming clear that it had been kind of difficult to attract contributors and community and enthusiasm with such a broad vision and large surface area where there was just a lot of work to do until this was really something that a data team could bring into the organization and replace whatever else they had with before. Because even though what they had before might not have had those software development best practices built in, at least they were like mature, independent products for every step of the road. And we were basically telling them, we've got something better, but it's super immature and it probably won't be kind of at the same level where you are for 3 years. But all of this stuff about version control built in should counteract that. And of course, that was a hard sell. Even internally at GitLab, our needs went faster than that Meltano team was able to sort of build the product. And the GitLab team wasn't using Meltano for the longest time, although now they are, which is really exciting. But yeah, so numbers weren't there at some point to warrant 6 full-time headcount on that project. And then when the decision was being made that they could really only justify having 1 full-time person on that for the remainder of 2020, no additional budget getting allocated, the decision was sort of made above me that I had essentially the widest, broadest range of skills to see if I could take over every aspect of the project for the time being. And it's easier sometimes also for a single person to decide, maybe let's give this a try, let's pivot in that direction, than 6 people. It's easier to just try something for a couple months and not have to clearly communicate to 6 people and explain what we're trying to do. And you can just kind of hack away and see if it sticks. And then if it doesn't, change your mind, try something slightly different from one day to the next, etc. But when that decision was made, like, hey, Douwe, you've been engineering lead here. Do you want to be the general manager? I recognized that it was probably the best move for the project. And I was probably at that time the person in the best position to sort of take over every aspect of that. Like the other people were either not technical enough to do the engineering, or maybe not. I mean, not to say that I'm not good at like marketing or product or whatever type of side at all, but it does come pretty easy for me. Also, the sort of people aspect that comes with building a product and building a company. So I took over. But in terms of stress, like, yeah, it was kind of overwhelming. But since the project had already been sort of not written up for dead, but the other scenario was just one where it would get wound down, and this was sort of a last chance, meant that also failing didn't feel so overwhelmingly like it would be failure, that I could just kind of step in and give it my best and see where it would go. And if it didn't work, like, that's already what would have happened if I hadn't given it a try. And then luckily I was able to figure out pretty quickly that there was a part of the product we had built that was much more directly sort of accessible in a team's existing data stack. We had built essentially an open source tool for data integration, also known as ELT or ETL, extract, load, and transform, which is all about getting data out of various systems, SaaS APIs, file formats, and bringing it together in a data warehouse where further analysis can then take place. And we had built something pretty compelling on that side of the story, which would be much easier for people to pick up standalone than as part of this really big end-to-end product. And once I had that realization, everything went kind of smoothly from then on out. Community started growing, contributors started coming on board. And at that point, it was just me getting up every day and figuring out, is this a day where where Meltano is best off if I program, or if I talk to the community, or if I do a talk at some conference. And step by step, we ended up getting closer and closer, and the community grew and grew, and eventually we had like 700 people in Slack. And that's when it also became clear to GitLab that this is sort of turned the corner, and let's see where this can go from here. And we started looking for that external funding. But from like the personal, what was it like to suddenly be left on that by myself? I've gotten pretty used to just kind of taking on any challenge or opportunity that's put in my path. And I'm pretty resilient to stress generally. And I have some amount of confidence that if I just do my best, either it won't work, and then, whatever, I'll just go back to what I was doing before, or it will work. And fortunately, most of the time it does work. And I have enough sort of track record on that also in my own head that I don't really stress or worry much. I just take it one day at a time and try to make good decisions. And in some sense, the lack of stress allows me to be a little bit more dispassionate and make better decisions than if I, was very much overthinking it, or took it super personally, or was really having trouble making a decisive call because I would be too, afraid of the downside or the risk taken. I've always been pretty risk taking, and that's made this a relatively smooth affair so far.
Yeah, I think I like your attitude of coming in, like I'm almost like I have nothing to lose. It's already on the way down. So it's like it can only get better from here, or it goes to nothing, and I'm back to where I was before. So it's no big deal. I love that attitude, because a lot of people will have this feeling of failure if they don't get there, but you're kind of like, it's going to fail anyway, so I might as well just give it a my all and see if I can turn this thing around. And you did, which is pretty awesome. I want to talk a little bit about Meltano and kind of what it is and what what DataOps is. That's kind of a newer term for me, because where I work, we don't have a data science department or anything like that. We went through a business transformation a couple of years ago. We're kind of getting into that DevOps realm now, where our development team is kind of merging together with our operations, and they're all reporting under me now. So it's kind of a cool method and place where we're at. But DataOps is kind of a newer term for me. Can you explain what is DataOps, and how does it relate to DevOps, or is it related at all? And how would I learn more about that?
Yeah, good question. So so it's a little bit, there's more to it than this, but the easiest way to get an idea of what it is just, DevOps applied to your data lifecycle and your data platform sort of development. So the way we think about it is that the data platform that an organization has, which is often a number of tools coming together, each data tool having some particular role in lifecycle. One tool might be getting data out of source systems and APIs. Another might be doing the transformations, like taking all of this different raw data from the APIs and combining it together into a new database schema for the data warehouse that analytics queries can then be run on. And then you have other tools like the actual, BI analytics visualization interface that runs those queries and graphs them in a nice way. And you have all kinds of things on the side, like something to manage data observability or your lineage, so that you can see, okay, I'm viewing this dashboard and I want to trace back all the way to the original data source that it came from. And this is getting all these tools together and configuring them and integrating them with each other is, the way we see it, building. You're not just buying 5 tools off the shelf and then you're done, or buying a single tool off the shelf and you're done. It's an ongoing process of taking tools, bringing in maybe different ones, changing the configuration, changing the assets inside the tools, like SQL queries or the definitions of the transformation layer. And we at GitLab saw pretty quickly that these teams are doing something that's far more like software development than they might realize. And a lot of these things that allow software development teams to collaborate effectively and to have high confidence in whatever's running in production, not just breaking, out of nowhere, come with these, what we think of as the software development and DevOps best practices, like version control and code review, automated testing in CI, automatic promotion from a staging environment to a production environment with a CD step. Just the concept of isolated environments at all, where you can run sort of a representative copy of your entire application locally and verify the changes before ever accidentally touching or risking something that someone's seeing in a live environment, taking it through staging where your team can do yet another sort of check before it actually goes live to where the customers might be affected by it. All of this stuff also helps data teams where, in their case, essentially their users and customers are other people inside the organization. And then the data team is almost the software development team where they take the feature, sort of the requests from outside, which become product feature requests. The data lead is almost a product manager where they have to prioritize all of these requests and kind of figure out, okay, how do we build a platform that also allows the stakeholders within the organization to answer some questions in a self-serve manner instead of just throwing questions to the data team and 2 days later the data team coming back with some kind of answer. So they're also building a product that essentially becomes the brain of the organization and a critical competitive asset to keeping that edge against the competitors. If you are able to better process how your product is actually landing with your users, or if you're figuring out which marketing campaigns are working, or if you're trying to figure out what direction the market is going into and what kind of opportunities you should be getting ahead of as a company, your data team and the work they do is a massive competitive asset. And the faster they're able to do it, the quicker they're able to iterate, the more they're able to use the best-in-class tools that just became available and really push the limits of how they can do their data work, the better. And if they don't feel like a wrong button click might accidentally break production, if they know that there's some automatic and manual sort of validation in place before your change would accidentally break something, people are far more experimentative and more likely to actually try out the things that might get them ahead of the curve. So DevOps is DataOps in a way is just DevOps applied to data work, and Meltano is a platform that allows teams to build a data platform like a software project. So it lives in a Git repo. You can bring in various open source components for different steps of the data lifecycle into your Meltano project, with Meltano being responsible for holding all these components together and managing their configuration and integrations and deployment in a consistent, centralized, streamlined way, so that you can put together as a team your ideal data stack without giving up the sort of cohesive experience that comes from having everything living in one place. Because today building a data platform often takes like 5 or 6 different components, and these end up living in different little SaaS websites, or some of them might be self-hosted, some of them might be inside AWS or GCP or whatever. But with Meltano, all of this stuff comes together again in one place and allows your team to collaborate on that more effectively and apply these software development best practices to every aspect of how your data platform evolves over time.
Wow. Yeah, it sounds like it makes perfect sense. When I look at, applying software best practices to other things, there's a book I read not too long ago where someone took the idea of Scrum and software practices and they took it to their family life. I forget what it's called now. I wish I could remember some headed, but basically the guy started doing like daily stand-ups with his kids and his family, and it's because he was having trouble like communicating with his teenagers, and like they were getting to the point in life where they didn't want mom and dad involved. So he started having like daily stand-ups, and he said like their grades like completely turned around. They started getting their stuff done, the chores around the house. Wow. Everybody kind of, it just changed the way. And I'm like, you could apply some of these software principles to pretty much any area. Keep the good stuff, get rid of the bad stuff, the things that don't fit. And, I love the fact that you guys have basically built a product doing that. And, have an open source community where people are like involved and using this, and it's growing and growing, and it's kind of cool use case of something that was done in for data, but can also maybe be done in other areas too.
Yeah. The interesting thing, like GitLab, the sort of the mission or the tagline, whatever, for GitLab was always everyone can contribute. And this was explicitly much broader than just like, oh, software developers can contribute or software developers can collaborate. From GitLab's perspective, and this is very core also to how the CEO, Sid Sijbrandij, who I referred to earlier, referred to it, is like all knowledge work would be better off with some of these best practices around version control, being able to like figure out why a change was made, having some ability to get a second opinion from your colleagues before something goes live, which is code review. If it's at all possible to do some automated testing, like any type of knowledge work is going to be better off. If someone's writing a book and you have some automatic typo checker, that's the type of CI/CD, really. If an author writing a book has an editor, that's kind of code review. And getting these people to work together in a similar collaborative environment where you have a software product that helps you through these sort of life cycle habits and stages is really valuable. And then from GitLab's perspective, there are of course certain industries that are more so similar to software development that it's ridiculous that they haven't picked this kind of stuff up yet. And the data world also, very much from my perspective as someone coming from software engineering and being very new to data, saw an industry that is very technical. Like most people at least are comfortable with SQL. They kind of get the point of like, they understand a little bit what code is and they can reason about it in a way where it's not too much of a stretch to ask them to also think about version control, or to also think about, there's a local CLI in your computer. Like there's a lot of people who can learn that if you give them a good enough argument too. And we saw them doing work in a way that reminded me of when I started programming when I was like 9 or 11, like I said. And I would just, when I was building a website for a client, I would just FTP into their web server and make live changes to PHP files and then check in the browser whether I broke something or not. And I got away with it only because those clients had like no expectations. But now it seems ridiculous to just be editing stuff live in production. And then in the data world, that's still how pretty much everything is done there. There are no isolated environments. There is
I mean, you have your A/B testing. It's all live. It's all out there. It's
all live. And if you're like in a dashboard and you're updating like a dashboard, or you're updating a query, or you're adding like a column, that live is immediately visible to everyone who was using that dashboard. And in that case, it's probably fine because the dashboard is visual. You can see before you hit save whether it looks the way you want it to. But what happens if you have the dashboard that is actually downstream of a transformation layer and downstream of like an integration layer with all of these configurations? Someone can just like make a change here and accidentally break this thing downstream because there's no way for either of these tools to report back to each other that you broke something before it's actually live in production. So people are just always kind of in production, hitting save, crossing their fingers and hoping for the best. And that was just, to me, so frustrating that it has motivated me to build this business to just solve that once and for all, and to start showing these other sort of adjacent industries to the software world how much better their life really could be, and how much more effective their teams could be and more collaborative if they took some of these lessons from software development. And data is so close that's sort of the first foray into doing that. But I can totally imagine other maybe GitLab spin-outs down the line, or other early GitLab people founding their own companies, trying to apply some of this stuff to other industries that might be a little bit less directly adjacent, but similarly could benefit a lot from this stuff.
Absolutely. And by the way, that book, just so in case any listeners are like wondering what that was, I looked it up just so I could tell them. The Secrets of Happy Families is what it's called, by Bruce Feller. So just in case anyone else.
The Secrets of Happy Families. I'm Googling it. That's awesome.
It's interesting. It doesn't talk about it, but when you like read the book, you actually see that he's applying Scrum techniques and project management to his family in a way where they have, like a Kanban board, and they use Kanban to like, talk about what their family activities are that week and what they're working on. And then they have their daily stand-ups, which they do at the dinner table. So it's kind of, it's a cool little activity. They have retros too at the end of the week, which is cool. I was like, oh, you put retrospectives into your family. It's awesome.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, and it does go to show that a lot of these practices are not nearly as like work specific or niche industry specific as you might think. You can take a lot of benefits from stuff that generally applies to collaboration or building something together. And that's amazing.
Going back into what you guys are doing with data right now, I thought about, and as you were saying that, it was triggering in my head, like we have a tight relationship with our creative group that and how close, creating, graphics and videos are to actually software, how you have iterations, you have change control, you have different versions that go out for different clients, and you want to do A/B testing on some of that stuff. And, why aren't we applying some of those principles there too? There's lots of future for this. And I think it's pretty awesome that you kind of capitalized on this with data first as a way to kind of prove that these tools are effective in other ways.
Yeah, I mean, and the cool thing, like you're giving the design example, right? And there's a number of companies doing sort of version control for design and allowing code review of these visual assets. And in that case, you kind of do need a new product that takes some of these same fundamentals like version control and everything else, but then makes it something that really works with these graphical assets and Photoshop files or whatever else. But in the case of data, the great thing is that a lot of this data work is behind the scenes also just code, like SQL queries or configuration files or whatever. So in our case, we haven't actually needed to reinvent any of the version control, code review, CI/CD. We actually allow data teams to use GitHub and GitLab and these similar products with their own data project. So in the case of the graphical world, they're probably not going to use GitLab or GitHub directly because they need something that's more built around those visual kind of assets. But in our case, Meltano in some way forms a layer between the worlds of DevOps and the world of data, and really forms that bridge that allows them to come together and for data engineering and data platform development to be adopted as a proper sub job or whatever of software development.
At most companies, do you see like the data science group kind of reports under like the CTO or under like the engineering group, or are they kind of adjacent to that? Where do you see that fit at most companies?
Good question. So for the most part, it actually falls it falls under the group that is getting the most benefit from the insights. So that is sometimes it's product, sometimes it's operations, sometimes it's like finance, because ultimately those are the people that have the questions and they have the budget to get those questions answered. And then it often starts with building a bunch of data, hiring a bunch of data people and having them build the software or buy the software for those questions to become answerable. So a lot of cases in less maybe forward thinking sort of tech organizations, it doesn't fall under engineering or tech at all. And in some cases also those parts of the business think of this more as, oh, we'll just hire a couple of people and buy them the biggest tool that we can find, the best tool that that is recommended by Gartner, whoever, and they still have that data platform as a tool you buy sort of mindset. And what we're seeing in some of these tech organizations where they do think of data as much more similar to building a product is that it does end up falling on the engineering side of the business, and that these data engineers have the same sort of freedom that software developers have to pick their own tools and to just find cool open source stuff and to bring it into their daily workflows. While in other parts of the business, that's not really how things are done. Like purchasing decisions might be made more by the people up the hierarchy rather than the individual engineers that actually need to end up doing the work. So the people that have been quickest to pick up Meltano are in these large tech organizations where their data teams have already been sort of overexposed to the way software development teams do things, and they think of their work as constantly sort of evolving this project, this asset that they have, rather than just I'm a user of a product that my boss once bought, which is interesting to see the difference. And we think that over time, more and more organizations will start seeing that it's a competitive advantage in order to build their own best possible data platform. And Meltano makes that happen. It's not just something you buy off the shelf, but something that allows you to kind of make your own choices and bring in the components that really work for you and the scale of company you're at, the types of challenges you're faced with.
All right, awesome. And I'm sure we have some data scientists and engineers out there listening right now. How can they learn more about Meltano and maybe connect with you and learn more about the things in the direction that you guys are going in the future?
Yeah, so the website is meltano.com. That's Meltano, which started out as an acronym for Model, Extract, Load, Transform, Analyze, Notebook, and Orchestrate. Some of these sort of steps in the data lifecycle, if that makes it easier to remember. We have a Slack community with more than 2,500 people right now, which you can join through meltano.com/Slack. It's all open source, so we've got our repositories on GitHub. And what we're really working on right now is just making Meltano the best possible way to build a modern data stack from scratch. We have a demo video on our website, which in 30 minutes takes you from zero to having a full end-to-end modern data stack up and running with Meltano, sort of that foundational layer that holds it all together, which is faster than you can go from nothing to having a full end-to-end pipelines with BI with any other solution. And then it also allows you to keep iterating on that data platform over time with some of these software development best practices. So if you don't have a modern data stack at all yet, or you feel like it's become really difficult to manage because you do feel feel that it's kind of fragile and you're afraid to touch something because you might break it, Meltano is an awesome, you should absolutely be checking it out. And since it's all open source, we are doing this with the community. So if there are tools that we don't support yet in Meltano, we will take your contributions also to kind of expand the types of components that we support. And generally, any kind of feedback, we'd love to take it on Slack. Right now, since it's open source, it's all self-managed. So you do have to be comfortable sort of managing this yourself, hosting these Docker containers with something like Terraform or Kubernetes. But in the second half of the year, we will be working on a managed hosting for Meltano projects where you can just put your stuff together locally. And then when you have it up and running in a proof of concept, getting it into production is just going to be a matter of pushing that project up to our website, and we'll take care of the rest. So stay tuned for that in the second half or first quarter of next year. And otherwise, meltano.com and meltano.com/Slack if you want to learn more about the open core.
Awesome. And I'll link that up in the show notes at geekleader.com as well. And thanks so much for coming on the show, man. I learned a lot about DataOps and kind of the future of that. And I think it's really cool to, the product that you guys are building and how you guys are expanding some of this stuff. So really cool.
Yeah, thanks, John. Looking forward to seeing you and your company joining our Slack as well, and seeing if you've got a place for Meltano in your tech stack.
If you enjoyed that episode, please leave a rating and review in Apple Podcasts. I'd greatly appreciate that. And also, don't forget to check out merch. We have some t-shirts that I've designed that are on at geekleader.com. You can click on the merchandise section there and check that out. And also, don't forget about the books from our guests. So if you like this guest and other guests that have written books, please go ahead and check that out at geekleader.com. I would greatly appreciate it, and I'm sure they would too.